Rice, the staple crop for more than 2 billion people worldwide. August in the Ludhiana district of the Punjab, some of the best farmland in India, producing some of the highest yields in the country. August in the foothills of the Himalayas. Much poorer land, but still a good harvest of traditional farmers' varieties, each one planted where it will grow best. Maintaining the diversity of these traditional systems in situ is now recognized as making a vital contribution to global food security. On the irrigated plains of Punjab, big farmers use the whole range of modern farming techniques. Irrigated land, chemical inputs, mechanization, to grow carefully selected high-yielding seed varieties. Men like Amarjit Singh Sidhu have grown rich in the process and pride themselves on being at the forefront of agricultural innovation. Sidhu is so successful that he has invested the profits in a farmer's store, supplying the latest seed varieties and a full range of agricultural chemicals. He is the Indian face of modern agriculture.
पिछले 20 सालों तो बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क आया है विच एग्रीकल्चर दे विच जदों कि झाड़ साडे
In the last 20 years, things have improved vastly. Output has increased, especially in wheat, by a factor of 5 or 6. It used to be only rice grown around here, but now we grow rice and wheat almost everywhere.
पैडी ने सारा एरिया कवर्ड कर लिया.
He now multiplies new seedlines on behalf of the Punjab Agricultural University and sells them in his shop, at the same time dispensing advice about modern farming methods to his customers.
We always use the correct dose of chemicals. Previously, farming with oxen meant that one task alone could take up to a day. Now with tractors, a lot of work can be done very quickly, like threshing, for example. There's also a change in that the old varieties of crops are not grown any longer. There's a preference here now for the new varieties because they give much higher yields.
But is this system sustainable? Fertilizer costs are rising and the state's water resources are depleting alarmingly. The water table here has now dropped to more than 100 feet below the surface, making irrigation more expensive every year. Pests and diseases are always a threat. Farmers like Sidhu have to spend a lot of money on pesticides. In an effort to keep one step ahead of the pests, the Agricultural University produces new seedlines every 2 or 3 years. One disease of wheat now plaguing the Punjab is a fungus, Karnal bunt, first seen at the village of Karnal. Resistant local varieties don't exist, they're all extinct. So researchers are now faced with an enormous task. They are testing the susceptibility of thousands of varieties from seeds sent by gene banks around the world. The whole project will take 10 years.
We have in this nursery more than 3,000 lines. And we get from USDA, from Simmet, Mexico, from Australia, and from many other countries. Since 1980, we have inoculated more than 33,000 lines. And promising lines, they are only 40 to 50, which have good plant type, you can say good grains, and which are also resistant to rust.
Punjab's grain production is vital to India. But maintaining high yields depends on this major research effort and genetic resources from elsewhere. Virtually all Punjab's traditional varieties disappeared a generation ago. Does Sidhu still grow any of those old land races himself?
No.
There's no point in growing them at all.
But somebody has to. Scientists can't create genes for disease resistance. They can only use the genes they find. Landraces and wild plants constantly adapt to survive new strains of disease, and they provide the genetic diversity the scientists need. So, plant genetic resources must be conserved where they are constantly evolving, as well as in gene banks. This in situ conservation is now recognized as an international priority, specified in the Convention on Biological Diversity. The Global Plan of Action outlines how this might be done. Putting a true value on biodiversity by using it to improve local people's lives is one fundamental principle. In hill regions of India, the modern farming package has had less impact than in Punjab. In the Jada Valley, with steep slopes and poor soils, the local farmers found that new seeds were not a complete success.
Oh yes, we did try hybrid seeds, but what we found here was that they only grew well sometimes and in some places. And afterwards, the next crop was no good. If you don't add chemical fertilizer, the production falls. And if you don't change these hybrid seeds every year, production goes down. I talked to my father and the elders around the village to ask them what was the matter. They said, the old seeds have all gone. And I wanted to know, how did this happen? These old seeds were finished off when the new seeds were brought in. At first, they were given out free. And not just the seeds, chemical fertilizers and insecticides were also provided. They started sowing them, and as a result, their own seeds started disappearing gradually. So I set out on a search for old seeds, but I began to feel that a collection of the old varieties should be made.
Vijay Jadari has persuaded many farmers in the valley to join him in seeking out and using traditional varieties of all their crops. They have now recovered several hundred landraces which grow successfully in the valley without chemical fertilizers or pesticides.
The Bij Bachao Andolan, that's the Seed Savers Group, it's an organization of farmers. Some of its members are also in the Chipko movement, while others are just ordinary farmers. We try to explain to villagers that if our traditional seeds are lost, then farmers will completely lose their self-sufficiency and independence. We would become dependent for seeds on the government, and for fertilizers on the government or multinational companies. And this would completely end the self-esteem of farmers. The age-old knowledge of farmers will be totally lost.
I would be romanticizing too much if I was to say that the Bij Bachao kind of thing can be immediately replicated all over the country or all over the world. It's the situation doesn't exist. And so therefore gene banks, which for instance in India have more than 100,000 accessions of seeds, many of which have been lost in situ, should be building partnerships with farmers to provide those seeds back, to help them in researching on them, to document the results and so on and so forth. But the most important thing is that the partnership should be on a basis of equality. It should not be that the formal sector still either as a patronizing attitude or as a superior attitude. It should go in with humility and say that you guys know as much as we do, maybe more, especially about local site-specific situations, and therefore it's a mutual learning process.
Vijay Jadari and the other farmers are now taking their seed-saving work further. In addition to collecting and conserving their local land races, they have started their own testing and selection work to improve local varieties. They are also restoring an ancient style of cultivation called the 13 grains, in which many crops are grown together in the same field, ripening successively and producing healthy yields that total far more than when the crops are grown separately. It's a system which encourages genetic diversity to thrive.
You see, the Beej Bachao Andolan doesn't look at seed just as material thing. It looks at it also in a larger context. It's a cultural resource. It's a spiritual resource. And so that kind of an attitude should also come into the formal sector. So that's a genuine partnership that would be built up in the future.
The island of Mindanao in the southern Philippines is a major rice-growing area. Here, as in India, official policy has meant persuading rice farmers to accept the modern farming package and abandon traditional varieties. Near Davao, a voluntary group called Conserve campaigns for the use of traditional varieties and promotes organic farming methods. It functions on a tiny budget provided by well-wishers and some international charities.
One of the reasons why farmers keep more varieties in here is that they have the option to select what particular varieties is best in this area. For instance, there is already an infestation of rice black bug happened, and it is fortunate that those traditional varieties being distributed now are showing its resistance compared to the high-yielding varieties.
Field workers from Conserve visit local farmers to discuss their problems. They also run training courses and seminars for them at their base.
I learned how to breed from the seminars I've attended, which is conducted by Conserve last almost 4 years ago. Then after I know the procedure, I practice it in my own farm. Why I moved to organic farming? Because I realized that in using pesticides, in using chemicals, you are destroying almost all in the environment.
By using organic methods and traditional varieties, Eddie has maintained his rice production and he's found that many other crops do better at the same time. Herbicides used to kill the taro plants. Now they grow profusely at the edge of the rice field, providing his family with a ready source of nutritious tubers.
In organic farming, I do not produce only rice, but diversified, different kinds of vegetables, sometimes fish, and it is also additional income.
Do you grow all these vegetables yourself?
Yes,
All of them?
because it is very expensive to buy it to the store.
Right.
So better you plant vegetables.
Yeah.
Further north in the Philippine Cordillera, communities of indigenous hill people still live in a self-sufficient way as they have for centuries. In the mountains, the importance of conserving diversity in situ has always been well understood and highly valued.
If you just go to any ordinary indigenous people's village here in the Cordillera, you will see that these home gardens also contain vast biodiversity for food needs. They also have some plants for medicinal purposes. The diversity that you can see here is actually a mini picture of the diversity that is generally found in the forests and in the communities of indigenous peoples. There are a lot of crops which are very diverse, like sweet potato, or what we call kamote. You can see that there are diverse varieties of this sweet potato in the field. So you will find different varieties and also different colors, different tastes. So depending on what that particular family is fond of, then they can produce all these different varieties. So that's just for sweet potato, but also for yam, or taro.
The staple food here is rice grown on ancient terraces. In the dry season, sweet potatoes are grown on the same fields. Local people have special knowledge about the hundreds of local varieties and the different ways they can be used.
So she explained that they need to have different varieties because these different varieties have, of course, first of all, they have different tastes and different uses. For instance, the two varieties that she showed are really the sticky rice, which is used for rice wine and also for some sweet. Yeah, and then the intan, for instance, is also soft rice. And the other senora is a very good one because it's, even if the water in the fields are not so plenty, it can still thrive. The important thing about indigenous knowledge is that it's really this kind of knowledge that has been accumulated through generations, and has been contributed to collectively by all the various indigenous peoples that has ensured that the biodiversity that we have is still maintained up to now.
Here at Agid, local people have become so concerned about losing local varieties that they have set up their own biodiversity garden, like a field gene bank on a slope above the village.
Well, this project I think is a very significant project, especially for the community here, because now they're trying to consciously plant all the different local varieties that they have, that they use, that they normally, actually they take for granted, but now they know that these are varieties that they should keep on sustaining, nurturing, because these are the varieties that have been proven to be more productive and more appropriate to our own particular conditions, whether soil or climatic conditions.
This as a Mispirus tree or lakwat is used as medicinal plants for cough.
How do you use it?
We prepare it as decoction.
Yes. From the leaves?
From the leaves or from the fruits also.
They don't get official support for this conservation project. In fact, this initiative has brought them into conflict with official farming policy.
I hope that eventually the government or the UN agencies will say that, sustainable agriculture is something that should be given an amount of support, like what they did for Green Revolution, So, I mean, that's my dream, that eventually we'll have the government say that, yes, the people's practices, the people's knowledge, as far as agriculture is concerned, are really the more sustainable practices. So, therefore, this is where all the support should be given.
India, as an example, has a huge agricultural and extension service controlled by the government. That extension service should learn from these farmer-driven initiatives and should then facilitate the more widespread dissemination of these kinds of initiatives and information and seed dispersal and so on and so forth into other villages, other areas where it has not currently, the initiative hasn't taken place. It so happens that governments in most of our countries, certainly India, has the bulk of the resources which would be needed to make the shift, and those resources must be put into the hands of these initiatives and into supporting these initiatives. Now, if the global plan of action could actually pressurize governments to do this, could actually facilitate not just governments but even international bodies. The CG system, for instance, or other international gene banks should be facilitating the reversal of the flow, which was an outflow from these farmers to the international system, should actually be reversing that flow. All the seeds should be flowing back and be tested out with and by the farmers so that that self-sufficiency and that initiative can be regained.
Strengthening traditional production systems is important for crop plants. But many of the world's plant genetic resources occur in wild places. It is the expansion of cultivation that is often the immediate threat to biodiversity. Since the last century, sugarcane and more recently tourism have been the basis of the economy of Mauritius, a tiny island nation with a standard of living higher than some European countries. But the natural vegetation that was cleared a century ago included hundreds of unique plants and trees. Over 600 species grow nowhere else in the world, but since they apparently had little economic value, the native plants have never been of great interest here, except as local medicines.
You chop it up in water and boil it for about 5 minutes, then drink it.
Today, several of these barks and herbs can no longer be found. With local people starting to notice their absence and Mauritians becoming concerned about the island's heritage, the idea of conserving biodiversity is now gaining support. This is the southeast corner of Mauritius in the cyclone season. From the botanical point of view, a good season for fieldwork. Many of the rare native species are in flower.
We have recently embarked on a project which is the mapping of the indigenous plants of Mauritius for the purpose of prioritizing conservation, plants and habitats. Now, in the process of this work, we have found plants that were thought to be extinct, namely one that hasn't been seen for the last 150 years. Now, these are very important finds, and we intend to capitalize on these things to raise the awareness of people, to create an ownership and a pride in Mauritius.
This is a very threatened tree, endemic to Mauritius, known only by one individual in the wild.
It may be rare, but as it is a species of ebony, it could also be extremely valuable. Others may have more curiosity value. This is the famous dodo tree. The extinct flightless bird is thought to have distributed its seeds. Just a handful of these trees still exist. Tourists are often keen to see them, but the conservation program has yet to succeed with cuttings. These ones have hardly grown at all in 2 years. They are trying to maintain whatever genetic diversity still exists by taking cuttings or seeds from as many different individuals of each rare species as possible. But with limited funds, it's an uphill task.
We are dealing with 68 species. That is 68 endangered and rare species. We are dealing with 68 species. And we are producing about 2,000 plants per year and reintroducing into conservation management area about 1,000.
This is the stump of the last Dombea mauritiana tree known in the wild. Luckily, emergency action had been taken before it died.
when this Wendy's crowd realized that the only Dombeja Mauritiana we have in the wild was doomed to disappear, having been attacked by fungus, she removed some cuttings and sent them to the public health center for nursing. After 2 years, she returned 2 cuttings, 2 seedlings, 2 well-off seedlings to me, which I have planted in Mondra. Now which are growing successfully.
At the Mondran Reserve, they are trying to provide the conditions for some of the rarest species to grow and reproduce as normally as possible. The idea is to augment the relic wild populations and to begin an in situ conservation process.
This one is a Sazalia boreana, a rare endemic shrub of Mauritius, critically endangered.
The real value of most of Mauritius' endangered plants is yet to be fully understood, but one group of rare endemics has already attracted international interest: wild species of coffee.
In Mauritius we've got 3 different species of coffea. Coffea macrocarpa, Mauritiana and Myrtifolia. Now the first 2, Macrocarpa and Mauritiana, are the upland species, whereas Myrtifolia is the lowland species. There's absolutely no problem with Myrtifolia. It's straightforward. It's a species which is distinctly different from the first 2. But the complex Mauritiana macrocarpa, we found specimens which are intermediates between the 2 species. If we look at the different herbarium specimens, you can see here a wide of different forms, and all these are meant to be Coffea macrocarpa. But visually you can see that they are quite different in morphology. Now, is that morphology due to the genetics of it, or is it due to the environment? This is the basic question that I'm going to try and answer. Well, definitely if they are different genetically, which means that they would be described eventually perhaps as new species or new subspecies, and it would then be important to try and conserve each of those entities. The implication for conservation is to enable the nature resource managers how to conserve the areas where they are growing. So it would help in deciding which areas should be turned into protected areas.
As well as the herbarium specimens, Ehsan Dalou has also been investigating the few wild coffee plants still growing in the wild.
Yeah, I think it's a miracle. This plant has actually survived amidst this forest area here, which has been chopped down and replaced by pine everywhere. It's a remnant of a species which is very rare in Mauritius, the Coffea mauritiana. The best method for conserving these species would be in their original habitat.
They have already erected fences around the best wild coffee sites to keep out deer and wild pigs. Inside the enclosures, each individual plant is tagged and records kept about its progress.
We have baiting station around, which then reduces the rat population of that particular habitat. And our observation has shown that the amount of seeds that are produced following rat control in these areas has increased tremendously.
There is also a high-tech angle to the project. DNA fingerprinting has now shown that one population of Coffea macrocarpa is genetically quite different from the others. It will be described as a new species, and the patch of forest where it occurs is now being specially protected. In other places, there are existing traditions which can be built on to conserve rare species. In India, there are thousands of sacred groves, tracts of land protected by very strict rules. They are often the only places where certain plant species survive, and many of them are suitable for protection as in situ conservation areas.
There are strict orders that no tree is to be cut here. It's not allowed. There's a lot of big trees, and they should be left to grow forever. There's a mountain of water underneath here. If anyone does cut a tree, they will be punished. We may have to punish them. Of course, they must know that they'll also be punished by nature.
Sacred groves are now being documented in several countries as part of the international efforts to assess biodiversity. What is particularly important about these places is that here the conservation of biodiversity coincides with cultural tradition. But in other places, this connection has been more difficult to find. It is estimated that desertification affects about 2/3 of the countries of the world, and fully 1/5 of the world population. Caused by a combination of climatic changes and human activities, desertification accelerates the genetic erosion of fragile ecosystems. Grazing pressure on the land is often high. Vetches and other legumes can help restore the fertility of degraded pasture land, but only if they are allowed to set seed by keeping grazing animals off the pasture in the flowering season. Later in the year, it doesn't matter if the plants are eaten. The live seeds pass through the animals and still reach the soil in the animal droppings. A particular danger of desertification is that the genetic erosion caused can affect the wild relatives of important crops like barley or wheat.
We are on a site about 1 kilometer northeast of Saint Simon, and the site is interesting because we have two wild weeds here, two important species. It is Triticum dicocoides and it is Triticum araraticum. The latter species was discovered first for Syria a year ago, just on this site. The difference between the two species is in disease resistant. Triticum araraticum is an excellent source of genes for disease resistance.
Full investigation of this rocky site revealed a number of other interesting species, and good reasons why the natural plant community could have survived intact.
There is wild barley. There are also wild relatives of fruit trees, like wild pistachio, wild almonds, and wild olives. And there is a number of ornamental plants, bulbs, and so on. So it's a certainly very diverse site, rich in diversity of quite important crops. This site is not grazed by sheep, it is grazed by cattle. And it is also difficult to move here for the animals, so there are patches that are quite protected. So that is probably the reason why these wild weeds survive here, because otherwise in the surrounding region we don't have these wild species. They are heavily eroded in the whole region. That is why we have already collected this site. We have samples in our gene bank, but we suggested a Syrian national program to conserve the two species here in situ.
So what would be the best way to conserve a site like this?
Well, the ideal situation would be just to keep the site like it is. So what we have to do, we have to contact the owner, and we have to learn a little bit more about the history of the site, about the management of the site, and so on. At this stage, just the monitoring would be fine.
In other places, the conservation of a whole ecosystem is intimately connected with the local people's welfare. On the south coast of Sumatra, villagers operate a special system of forest management, or agroforestry. They have quite a high standard of living, which depends on hundreds of forest products, as well as the rice which they grow on the narrow coastal plain. The most valuable forest product here is damar, a resin exported for use in the manufacture of lacquers and paints. Damar is produced by one of the biggest forest trees, a dipterocarp Shorea javanicus. The resin commands a good price internationally, providing the villagers with a good cash income and giving them an excellent reason for conserving the forest. They depend on many other forest plants, both for local consumption and for sale in the cities. Fruits, medicines, and bamboo for construction.
This is what we call damar agroforest, which is basically a forest, but completely included into the farmer's world, agricultural world. It's very interesting in terms of conserving a lot of plants, a lot of animals. All the mammals you can see in the natural forest, primary forest, are here, including tiger, rhinoceros. They are here. So it's a very interesting way of making use of the land. So it's much profitable and sustainable in economic terms, and quite sustainable and interesting for diversity and environment.
In January 1998, the Indonesian government approved a historic decree recognizing for the first time the legitimacy of these community-managed agroforests. Scientists are working here closely with the local community, the Indonesian government, and local voluntary organizations. They are studying the benefits of these forest management systems to see if lessons could be learned for in situ conservation in other places. The system is so successful that local people are now planting new areas to extend the damar forest. Seeds are collected from the best trees and germinated under carefully controlled shade.
Local people recognize two different kinds at the seedling level, according to the color of the terminal bud. Yeah. So they separate these two categories. One is recognized as better producing in terms of resin, and the other one is less producing in terms of resin, but much better wood. So there is certainly a first step in selection, but they can certainly be improved. One way of improving would be to select trees that can produce before 20 years, after 10 years, for instance. That could be interesting, but at the same time, that would mean a different system. And that could be also a way of adapting the tree to monoculture. So it could be maybe interesting in a certain way, but also losing the ability of that tree as a main skeleton of that forest.
How to balance the in situ conservation of genetic resources with people's everyday needs is a critical issue in many parts of the world. At Sierra de Manantlan Biosphere Reserve, where the rare perennial wild maize Zea diploperennis was discovered, in situ conservation has been part of the management plan for the last 20 years. The original idea was to freeze the genetic landscape, but recently research has been done with farmers in the area to find out how they maintain their local maize landraces.
I was here for 3 years. What I found is that during these 3 years, 26 different varieties were sown. Not 26 by each farmer, but on the whole valley, 26 varieties. So I found that there is a big pool of local varieties which have a big importance, But we have also a lot of little varieties that are brought from outside of the valley, that are sown by farmers because they want to try and to new varieties. They're very curious about new varieties.
What about improved varieties? I mean, the commercial ones or the hybrids. Were they using any of those in this valley?
Now, in this valley, for the moment, there is not, because the local varieties has a short duration of cycle. They flower very rapidly compared with hybrids. And here they used to sow 2 cycles in the year, so they need a variety that have ears very, very rapidly. So this variety hasn't been displaced for this reason. But perhaps if one day a hybrid comes here with a short duration of his cycle, he can displace perhaps the local one. But for the moment they have not displaced, and on the contrary, they have aggregate diversity.
In fact, local farmers have a skeptical attitude towards new seeds, although they'll always give them a try. They are very proud to show their local varieties and explain their particular advantages.
This was the same maize the Aztecs used to plant. They must have introduced it. They used to plant it here. That's a historical fact. Now, the black one and the red and the yellow, they're all local varieties.
In many parts of the world, farmers continue to grow their traditional varieties. No one wants them to be living in a museum, so can modern crop science help them without losing their local diversity?
The answer is not to come in with a modern variety and replace what they have. This will rarely be successful. I would say never, but in very few cases can we expect the kind of introductions of this type to make a major impact on local agricultural systems of that type. And so I see a big role for gene banks, for genetic resources workers generally, and even plant breeders to be forging much closer links with these local communities, with these farming communities, to help them to introduce new genetic variability to those farming communities and work with the farmers to select out things that are locally adapted.
Landraces can be genetically improved to give better yields without additional inputs, but it does require a new approach from the scientists and depends on the continued survival of landraces to work with.
Because stress conditions are very different from area to area, by and large I would say that drought means different things in different countries. Then with this approach you are likely to identify varieties which are specifically adapted to a given area, which might be a very small area or a slightly larger areas. And therefore, with this approach, in a given country, there will be a number of varieties which will fit a number of environmental niches.
Dr. Ceccarelli works closely with local farmers like Hassan Mohammed, who farms in an area that is too dry for wheat and where barley is the main crop.
I like to collaborate with research centres and learn from them. Through this work in the last 6 years, we've developed an improved barley variety called Arta. It's very good for productivity, shape, colour and yield. I don't care if it's short or tall, my main interest is in grain yield. If it has high yield of both grain and straw, so much the better. This Arta has already spread very widely in our area. Farmers are begging me for it. People move around and talk about it and take it with them.
Now the problem that there is with this approach is to answer the question, but who is going to produce the seed of these so-called pocket varieties, because there is not enough quantity of seed of each variety to make a business out of it. Now, the question, or the people asking these questions, seems to forget that agriculture in countries like Syria has been going on long before seed companies were established. And where the seed was coming from? The seed usually comes from trade, from farmer to farmer, or from the seed stock of the farmer himself. And the approach that we are attempting here is trying to link the so-called formal breeding, with its enormous capacity of generating genetic variability, to these sometimes defined informal seed system, by which if the seed can reach the farmer very quickly, then it will be the responsibility of the farmer, it will be the interest of the farmer to adopt the variety, to multiply it, and when he has enough seed, he will make an additional income by selling the extra seed to the neighbors.
One country where partnerships between scientists and farmers are beginning to flourish is Ethiopia. A project at Ejere with local farmers has been functioning since 1993.
So it's a place where diversity is lost, and now the major program here is to bring in those diversity which is lost. Sorghum, for example, is lost, as farmers told us some 20-25 years ago. And this is because of the distribution of improved wheat varieties, and that displaced the sorghum from its place. Now they need it very much for food and also to widen their option, because time problems are coming in, things are changing and so on. I think this is a best example for the complementarity of both systems, where you keep diversity off the farm and on farm, and they come together, to complement each other. And where you don't have on farm, you bring in materials from the field, from the gene bank to the field. And where you don't have it in the gene bank, you take materials from the farm and keep it there. And you have two options. You have security, you have your materials on the farm, and you have them also in the field, in the gene bank.
The project has helped the development of a local farmers' organization led by some of the most respected local citizens.
30 years back, these varieties were here, but they've almost disappeared and been replaced by new varieties. Now we've got a chance to reintroduce them and for everyone to grow them.
Conservation, in a way, is an investment. It must be an investment which is having a lot of components in it that enables sustained, like production, for instance. If production is not an important element of conservation, it will really be difficult to sustain the system. In fact, farmers have been doing the same thing over the years, you see. They have been improving, they have been selecting. So when we are appreciating the farmers' knowledge in selecting and improving, in a way we are talking about integrated kind of approach for farmers, where they conserve, maintain diversity as a backup to their selections and production. There is nothing wrong in green revolution in a way, but the problem is when the green revolution, when homogenization, improvement is discarding its own backup. That's a danger of it. That is where we lost a lot of games. Otherwise, we are for the technologies, because the world is changing, our demand and need is changing. We have to develop approach technologies, but in such a way that you still have your backup. Your options are wide, your bases are very much strong. This is how I view the issue.
The success of the Ethiopian project is that the conservation of genetic resources has been combined with clear benefits to the local people.
What they want to do is to develop. They want to be able to send their children to school. They want to be able to eat properly. They want to have assurance of a decent income. I believe that the best way they can do that is to develop their own materials, and with the assistance of scientific plant breeders, helping them to input new genes to their land races, to work with them to develop the land races, they will in fact be conserving the essential characteristics and many of the genes and the adapted gene complexes of their own material.
Putting biodiversity to work for the benefit of poor rural communities is a major challenge for the years ahead. In the Andes, they've had great success with a special initiative, local seed fairs. This is the remote village of La Encanada, where farmers from more than 20 villages meet to exhibit their produce and exchange their seeds. There's a competition, not for the best specimens, but for the greatest diversity of each crop. To start with, all the entries have to be registered by the judges. In 4 years, local farmers' knowledge about the diversity of all the main crops has increased. In this valley, they used to grow only 20 potato varieties. Today, they have over 80. The whole event is now run by the local farmers' organization, with help from experts like Mario Tapia from the International Potato Center in Lima.
I think one of the most important aspects is to get the people involved and give the value of what they have been doing for centuries. So this recognition of their work and feel them as a real in situ conservationist and doing a job not only for them but for the community, for the country, and even for the world. It's so important to feel that they become proud to get this biodiversity management.
And how do you achieve this? Because this doesn't happen overnight, does it?
That's right. You know, you cannot easily get the situation, but constance, I mean, to be permanently working with them and then attending their real problems, because biodiversity is related to food security, food soil conservation. Actually, I should say the whole conservation of their chacras, of their farms. So for them, it becomes so natural to invest time and interest to preserve the genetic material.
Well, 3 years ago, only those of us from this area took part. But now we see there's people here from many other districts, other villages. So it's important because there's much more participation from growers. Little by little, they keep getting hold of different new seeds at events like this. That's why they keep coming here from all over. Something which didn't happen 3 years ago. Used to be just us locals.
Apoyar, por ejemplo, y esta área de frutales en la que menos se ha trabajado. We are in the process now to get what is called a germoplast bank that belongs to the farmer, and this bank use it as a source of material that it will provide material to be marketed. So the next step for us is how to organize the market as well as the farmers to get this relationship, how to use properly the biodiversity, not only for own consumption, but also for the market. I'm sure people in the urban areas are willing to eat and taste different varieties of potatoes, orcas, or yuccas, but they don't know. So we want to relate the farmers with the urban people.
The prospect of farmers' groups improving their lives by developing the diversity of their local produce and conserving genetic resources is a model that is already being applied as far away as Africa and Asia. In the long run, these local initiatives may turn out to be just as important for conserving genetic resources as the network of international gene banks. Successful conservation needs complementary efforts at all levels: international, national and local.